Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to build million-dollar businesses without sacrificing their health, relationships, or happiness, who understand that in order to build their empire, they need a solid foundation, and that the more they are thriving, the more their business is thriving too. This show brings you the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Garbutt, the scientist turned mindset and high-performance coach for entrepreneurs, and I help you get wired for success. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. And today, I'm super excited to bring you another Leaders or Readers Wired for Success book club episode. And I know it's been a while since I've done one of those, and it's really high time that I add another episode to this cool segment of the show. And in case you're new to the podcast and you have no idea what I'm talking about, here's the gist. The Leaders or Readers Wired for Success book club is dedicated to introducing you to the best books from the science, self-development, and entrepreneurship categories that help you get wired for success. Now, as a self-confessed book nerd, this is a segment of the show that I'm really passionate about because I want to help those authors get their books in front of the right people, and I also want to help my listeners find those amazing new books that will really help them live their best lives. And that's why I invite those nonfiction authors from those categories that I mentioned before to discuss their latest books so that we can all explore new ideas and proven frameworks together. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's featured author. My guest today is consumer neuroscientist, entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and award-winning author Kai-Markus Müller. Kai is professor of consumer behavior at the Business School of Furtwangen, Germany, and the director of pricing research at Neurensics in Amsterdam. He developed neuropricing, an EEG and reaction time-based method to determine perceived value from brain scans. And he now focuses his research on pricing and predicting consumer behavior using neuroscience, psychology, and other data-intensive sources. And the brand new book that he has published with his co-author, Gabriele Rehbock, is called The Invisible Game, The Secrets and the Science of Winning Minds and Winning Deals. And it teaches you how to apply behavioral economics and neuroscience to outperform your competition in the professional sales process. So this is some seriously fascinating work, and I really enjoyed reading this book. And I can't wait to dig deeper and discuss some of its aspects today. So welcome, Kai, and thank you so much for being on my show today.
Hello, Claudia. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So Kai, there are so many fascinating fun facts in the book, and I took so many notes that we could easily talk for hours. So my challenge for today is to really limit myself to just a few topics maybe, so that people understand how your research can benefit their businesses. And then we will have to leave it up to the listeners to work through your book to find all the other gold nuggets in there. So before we dive into the content of the book, let's look at another type of invisible game. As I mentioned in the intro, you are an accomplished neuroscientist. You're a professor of consumer behavior, a successful entrepreneur, speaker, and author. So that's the visible game that you're playing, if you like. What's the invisible game behind that? Or in other words, what motivations and driving forces have influenced your career path, and why did you choose to focus on neuroscience and behavioral economics?
Ooh, that's a long question, and it's a good one because I probably should have planned the invisible part a little better. And so during my life and my career, well, one thing came to the other, and there were quite a bunch of career path changes, which in the end led to where I am today, and in the end really paid off because in each step I managed to take the learning on to the next step. So yeah, so I did my PhD in the United States. I'm like Claudia, I'm German. For those listeners who are new to me, um, I did my PhD in the United States, actually back in the days at the US government, the NIH, working in visual perception. How does the brain perceive faces, shapes, and colors and things like that? And then left science for a little bit, went on to become a management consultant with one of the world's leading price management consultancies, price and marketing consultancies. And after 2 years, somehow it turned out that I really want to do my own thing. So I started my own business, started a startup, and used neuroscience and techniques from psychology and science to measure the optimal price for a product, the perceived value for a product, which was back in the days very new, because back in the days the main tool was to ask people, either ask them to make a decision or ask them to go on with a just simple statement saying I would buy or I would not buy at this price. Yes, and so I ran this company for about 8 years until I had the chance to become a professor of consumer behavior, and at the same time to to exit the technology, or to sell the technology to a very, very established and a wonderful Dutch company called Neurensics, which in the end also took me on board as their director of pricing research. Well, so these things sometimes happened. There was maybe a bit of serendipity, a bit of chance involved in all of that, but well, in the end, the one thing that always, maybe the red thread that goes through my life, is I've always been interested in behavior, sometimes a bit more on the pricing side, and sometimes a bit more on the brain side. But in the end, I've always been a fan of behavior, understanding behavior on a scientific level, and making something out of it.
That's so fascinating. And we will come back to some of those aspects later in this conversation. Now, I'm curious, how was the idea of the invisible game born? Have you always wanted to write a book, or is that just something that people expect from a professor at some stage or another?
So the idea was basically coming out of an interesting collaboration. Because I wrote a German book, which was actually explaining things like how does the brain process prices, and how can any business, say a restaurant or a consumer goods company, how can they use neuroscience, and how can they use research in order to find the optimal price, and in order to design their choice architectures so that the consumer is going to make a decision that is in the interest of the company and of the brand or of the retailer. Well, now that's actually something that many books have been dealing with, and a lot of research has been done. There are entire scientific journals, entire scientific societies on the topic of consumer psychology, on the topic of consumer research. And what is interesting is that if you think about consumer research and consumer psychology, it's what I teach at the university. When you think about that, it's actually, the interesting thing is actually that um, these companies, mainly these big consumer brands and these retailers, they have a lot of data. Also, all the online companies such as Amazon or eBay or so, they have a lot of data. So when they want to see if a certain, for example, a certain offer is something that speaks to people and whether people are going to buy it, then um, then okay, so, okay, then they can all test that. So that's a good
Yes.
thing. They can actually there's this is this is all testable. So all this knowledge that we have about consumers and all these insights that we have about consumers is actually something that that is very cool and that is super fascinating. However, it is at the same time also all testable by these companies for which the research was done. So there are many companies out there that only make, especially many salespeople, that only have a few deals a year. Think about a lawyer, or think about someone who works in B2B and sells large chemical projects, or think about an architect who sells big construction projects. So all these people cannot test. This is the general. They cannot test whatever it is that they want to test. So if they have a choice architecture, or if they want to try out something, it's way too risky for them to potentially lose a customer. So actually, all these fascinating theories that have been found out in consumer psychology, they are much more applicable to the professional sale. And the professional sale is where we coined the term the invisible game, because there you play a game where you are potentially influencing or are being influenced by a buyer. And this actually, in the end, is something that that makes or breaks a deal. So, and in the end, the question is, are you getting the deal, or are you not getting the deal, or are you getting the deal on your terms? Are you getting the deal on the buyer's terms? So all these questions, they are extremely relevant in the case of B2B, because in B2B you just have many fewer deals, and so for B2B, all that research that has been done in consumer psychology is extremely relevant, right? And that's why we extracted those theories, which is, we could only extract the absolute top theories. There are so many more effects, but all those theories and effects that are relevant. And those, we extracted those in a manner that they really speak to the B2B salesperson. And the nice thing is that I do have quite some B2B sales experience, because I've been, of course, selling my neuroscience services for many years. But even better so, I've been teaming up with Gabi Reebok, who is my co-author, and she has been putting lots and lots of practical insights for key accounters, for professional sellers and so forth, how to deal with professional buyers. And the entire idea is also based on, of course, the fact, or the hypothesis, the strong hypothesis that a buyer is actually a human being that is just as susceptible to potential biases as anyone else. And it really doesn't matter if you wear a suit or jeans. You are always a human being that makes decisions.
That's so true. So is it fair to say that you use the big data set of the B2C world to condense down, or to find those principles that you can then apply to the B2B world as well, where you have a small data set and therefore can't really it doesn't give you the same validity. Like if you test something with a small sample size, you have different effects that you have to take into account, right? So you take the big data set, which is more reliable, and then you condense it down to a smaller data set.
Yes, that is basically exactly what it is, right?
Awesome.
So in science, many experiments have turned into been turned into theories, and understanding these theories and making them applicable to the B2B world is kind of the critical issue here in the invisible game.
Now that we have set the stage and people know a little bit more about the backstory of the book and your motivation for writing it, let's dive into the content and start with some just very basic definitions to get everyone on the same page. So can you explain again in just very basic terms, what is the visible game and what is the invisible game in sales negotiations?
Yeah. So, what is the visible game? The visible game is everything that any seller actually is basically familiar with. Writing an offer, receiving an RFP, a request for proposal, visiting a potential client. All these things are visible, and they're being played on the outside. But then there are many
Layers?
strategic moves and layers happening on the non-conscious layer. So, for example, feeling sympathy with someone, for someone, or being liking someone else. The personal history of yourself. So, for example, the question like, have you recently had a huge deal and potentially very different numerical perception as in a small deal? All these things are happening on a non-conscious level. And for example, designing various choices that a buyer can choose from is basically how you design them is not visible to the buyer's side, right? They only receive an offer, and it looks like there are 3 versions of your offer or something like that. And in the end, these 3 versions have been designed to potentially influence their decision.
So to understand the invisible game, I'd love for you to explain Daniel Kahneman's concept of system 1 and system 2, because I think that's what everyone needs to understand.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe to clarify that the concepts have been made popular by Kahneman. They haven't yet been. They have actually not been introduced by him. But anyway, the idea here is based on basically a very, very old psychological insight, and that is that we can think in sort of 2 modes. So the one mode is more our conscious processing, our thinking, our analytical mind, such as that we use for playing chess or for doing our taxes. When we, for writing a book, to take that example. But then there are many other processes that we do automatically, non-consciously, such as riding a bicycle. You can ride a bicycle and at the same time think about something else. Solving easy math problems, finishing easy sentences. If I say bread and you think butter, and that is not something you need you need a lot of effort for. And system 1 is really the effortless, smooth, non-conscious, fast version of thinking, and system 2 is the analytical version and the slower version. And various authors have used different terms. In the end, even Sigmund Freud, who is nowadays no longer considered to be a good example for how to do science, even Sigmund Freud was actually already thinking about a conscious and a non-conscious part of our thought processes and of our approaching. And so what the invisible game is actually not just a synonym for system one, but it's actually the idea that there is somewhat a visible game. So the two system twos are battling each other in the buyer and the purchaser side, but also the two system twos are potentially battling each other on in a sales interaction, and that is, so to say, the invisible game. And the invisible game gives you strategies at hand to basically win that very, very, very relevant part of the game.
That's also fascinating. And for everyone listening, if you want to go really deep on this, then read Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a wonderful book, and there are so many fascinating insights into human behavior and decision making in there. So I think that's another book recommendation. But to fill what we've just talked about with a little bit of color for the listeners who might not be familiar with Kahneman's work, can you illustrate the two systems, maybe using an example from your own life? So maybe you remember a choice in your life that looked great on paper, but it simply didn't feel right. So what's going on in that situation in terms of system one and system two? And how did you resolve that conflict?
Well, I'm not claiming that I'm very good at resolving these things. I think hardly anyone is.
Sure.
Well,
Or maybe it's more something that you know you shouldn't be doing, but you still feel like you want to do it.
exactly. Those are typical examples, right? I mean, your system two says, well, yeah, no ice cream today because you didn't go running last night, and system one, last night system one said, well, what about beer and chips? And today's system one says, what about ice cream?
Yeah.
So that's a typical thing. It doesn't happen every day to me, but sometimes it does happen, and I think people can potentially relate to that. But there are many other choices. For example, well, I mean, another good, maybe here's a good example. I could have studied medicine, and I had a place to study in Munich, and on paper it might have been the right decision, right? Because it would have been safer, it would have been less less adventurous than studying psychology. It would have been a clear career path. And indeed, I was about to finish my psychology degree anyway, so it would have been even a quicker doctorate than doing a doctor PhD in the end. But I didn't do it, and that was maybe more of a system one than a system two decision as well. So you see that even in highly relevant situations where you think you actually use your system two, it is the harder the decision, the more often you use your system one. A great example for that is actually the very, very hard decision whether one should become an organ donor or not. Well, people really think about this a lot, right? And there's one determinant that determines that's the primary determinant whether you are an organ donor or not, and that is whether your government says you are an organ donor and you have to opt out, or whether you're an organ donor, not an organ donor, and you can opt in, right? In the opt-in case, there's less than 20% of the population is organ donors, despite each government begging a lot, right? And some governments begging people more or less. But in the opt-out case, basically, there's usually more than 98% of organ donors, or more than 95% or something like that. And that is a very, very straightforward decision then in that case. So you see that that it's not because the decision is too simple, or we don't care about being organ donors. No, it is actually because the decision for us is too hard to make it, and that's why we are happy if someone else has made that decision for us.
Right. So If in doubt, do nothing. That's the default.
Well, that's the default. Yes,
That's
that is the default, but that's not what I recommend. By the
yeah,
way, right? Because, for
exactly.
example, you will have your newspaper being
Yeah.
delivered forever to you, even if you don't read it anymore. You will have your flat fee train ticket, whatever, coming to you because you never got around to canceling it. So actually, in terms of your own financial health, it's important to be aware of these effects.
Absolutely. And sometimes it feels like system one is like a small child. It's just the what do I want right now? And I don't know about system two. Something that I was recently wondering about is just with all these advances in AI technology,
Mhm.
I was wondering, is AI and the way it reasons, is it comparable to our system two? What are your thoughts on that? Because it doesn't have the
Mm.
emotional side, right? So would it be a pure system two reasoning?
Um, if you play in the system 2 space, then yes. Now, the issue is if you play in pricing, for example, prices are an arbitrary association between a number and a product or service. And there's nothing better than that demonstrates that than issues like the power of free or decoys. So
Mm.
um, there's one famous example that was made famous by Dan Ariely, also, by the way, who did not discover the decoy effect. It was discovered in 1980 already by some other consumer psychologists, but Dan Ariely in his TED Talk made this one example extremely famous, as well as in his book Predictably Irrational, where he said, well, one has to take into account this experiment that he talks about was done about 15 years ago. So where the internet wasn't as advanced as it is today, and people would still sit on clumsy and slow desktop computers and not have internet on their phone. It's crazy. It's only 15 years ago, right? One feels like this has been like that all our lives, but it hasn't. Well, anyway, so back in these days, he asked people, well, imagine, well, he had business students, by the way. So business students are interested in reading The Economist. And he said, which subscription of an Economist would you prefer? A print plus online subscription for $125, or a pure online subscription for $70 or so, and or third version, a combined offer for $125, which includes both the subscription and so the online prescription and the print subscription. So people understood this and were like, oh, well, it looks like this combined offer is just as good as print only. I'll take the combined offer. This is fabulous, right? So nobody took the print offer, but that means if you take out the print offer, I mean, if you think about this in a strategic corporate perspective, companies usually kick out products that don't sell at all, right?
Yeah.
So that's a typical thing. Like if you think about the BCG matrix, the Boston Consulting matrix, where they call it the poor dogs are the ones that you should, the product that you should kick out of your portfolio. Now, it turns out that if you do that, you take out the pure, the combined one, then you have, if you take out the pure print one and have the combined, and then only the second alternative being the online subscription, then people switch to the online subscription. So here you see that both within their choice architecture, both decisions are rational. But
Yeah.
we see, if we look at that, how irrational we behave, because why should a product that nobody buys influence my decision, right? So I have no idea how an AI shall tackle that problem, right? And if an AI makes the rational decision and the rational decision seemingly one time taking product A and the other other time taking product B, then I honestly think that the invisible game has a very, very, very long shelf life, because no matter how much AI you put into it, I wouldn't know how AI could ever solve this.
That's so fascinating. We should try that.
We should, yeah.
Now, here's a quote from your book. We believe that the autopilot of System 1 is not only undervalued, but massively undertrained. And this is a point that I want to dig deeper into. So why is it undervalued in your opinion? And how can we train our System 1 to make better decisions that are aligned with our conscious goals?
Yes, that's a great question, and that is something where I think the book really brings in quite a number of very, very new ideas and concepts, because we've been also diving into the literature of psychotherapy and of self-management and things like that. How do you change your own behavior? Because well, it's all fascinating how you can fool people with a decoy, or you can do other sales tricks, so people will do either A or B, whichever you want them to, and that's all interesting. But the question is now, if you look at a buyer, so a professional purchaser, they're very well trained in the psychology of negotiations. They will know all these tricks. So how do you help becoming immune against against many of these relatively simple tricks? And to that end, we also looked at a concept that I think it's one of the most amazing concepts in psychology, but it hasn't been gotten the attention in the business book literature that it actually deserves. So it's actually the concept of the dominant response, of Robert Zayang's dominant response. So the idea here is that if you are under some kind of pressure, in the case of Robert Zayang's, he actually looked at that in the context of other people watching you, something that puts you more under pressure. So being live, for example, puts you more under pressure than if the thing is just recorded here, just as an example. And that means you have a tendency to follow your dominant response. So the dominant response is basically the straightforward thing to do. Now, in a tricky situation, usually the straightforward thing to do is not the right thing to do, right? Otherwise, it would not be a tricky situation. This trivial situation. In a trivial situation, the right thing to do is a straightforward thing to do. But let's to give you an example here. Imagine you're in a stadium running, and there are I don't know, 50,000 people screaming at you, right? You will be doing the race of your life. You know, your 100-meter performance will be better, right? Because it's a straightforward dominant thing to do. Run, just run straight ahead, right? Now, imagine you have to you have to solve a very tricky mathematical problem when doing your taxes in a stadium and 50,000 people screaming at you. Well, you are probably performing worse, right? Because it would not be, you're not doing you're doing the straightforward things, and they are probably wrong, right? So, so here you see that what you should do is you should train your dominant response, right? You should train to do the right thing. And that is something that is well known, for example, with musicians. Musicians like professional rock bands, for example, you hear often from them that they say, well, you know, I'm playing automatically my song, my instrument, and then I can actually look at the audience and interact with them, or I can hop around, or whatever they do there, right? So that's one of the things, right? Whatever they do there, no pun intended with the German scandals right now. So anyway, you also see this with another good example is soccer professional soccer players. They've been training their movements so often that it really doesn't matter to them how many people are screaming at them. Indeed, because they've been turning the tricky response, like making a certain, I don't know, trick or so with the ball, they've been so overtraining that it has become their dominant response, and that is why they then perform even better when they're under pressure. And so that is something that a salesperson can also learn. You can actually learn for example, to say no. The dominant response when somebody comes to you and says, can you give me a discount? Well, the first thing is like, yeah, I'll see what I can do, right? And of course, that is not what the dominant response should be. The dominant response should be no. For a number of reasons. It gives you time to activate your system too. You can think about it. And do I want to give the discount, or how do I structure my discount? And B, you can always go back and say no. Well, let's think about the discount, right? But if you say yes, you cannot go back to saying no. I'm not going to give you a discount. That is very tricky. And so these are the concept of the dominant response, and you can train your dominant response in many cases. For instance, you can train, for example, to blurt out relatively high numbers, and then observe how your counterpart responds, whether they like, are they shocked, or are they exactly, or are they just playing just fooling you, or what? Are they laughing? But if you are not used to that, and if you haven't trained it, it becomes very hard to do all these things at the same time. And so our advice is to train your system one, and we have a bunch of tricks in there on how to get there step by step. Actually, tricks from self-management and based on therapeutical approaches.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because it's kind of like the same steps that I use with my coaching clients. So super interesting.
Cool.
So coming back to the pricing aspect, what surprising lessons has your Starbucks study taught you about pricing? And can you maybe explain the objective, setup, and the results of the study just very quickly?
Yeah, very quickly. So we've already alluded to that topic earlier. Because it was a study that one of the first studies that I conducted with the EEG brain scan. So I used EEG brainwaves, which is an excellent tool to show whether something in the brain matches or doesn't match. So we've had earlier the example bread and butter. If I show you these two words on the screen, bread and butter, then your brain will, quote unquote, say yes, right? There'll be a brain response. That's typical for yes. Then the alternative could be, I could say, I don't know, BMW butter, right? Has nothing to do with each other. Your response will be a no, right? Because BMW and butter have nothing to do with each other. So I developed these approaches a little further, and I checked which signals can tell me whether a price matches the product, right? And so I was showing people a cup of coffee from Starbucks. They knew it was a small cup of coffee, and they were all Starbucks customers, so this was the right target group. And I could show that at a time where Starbucks sold their small cup of coffee at €1.80, the best price product match, and so to say, the perceived value, this non-conscious, subconsciously perceived value, was at €2.40. That is potentially a 33% price increase in order to match the perceived value. And that was a really cool study. And a study that kind of somehow made it to the media, so we were quite happy about that. And this technique has been, proven invaluable. We've done incredibly cool research, for example, just very quickly at one point, and here brings us a little bit back to the invisible game as well as the mind of the seller. We could show that in a study that in people who sell insurances, so professional brokers, that their value perception for their own product, for their own insurances, was lower than the value perception of the people who wanted to buy that insurance, which is, needless to say, it's a big hurdle for selling the product. Yeah, if I believe less in my product and that I want to sell it to you, and you believe more in the product than I do, then there is an obvious problem. So here is one other thing. You can train your system one, your dominant response, your system one, to really believe in the value of your products. And when you train, for example, a team of salespeople, you have to convince them that they're selling an amazing product.
Right. So interesting. Now, here's a question that a lot of people might ask themselves when they hear this is, how can we determine this feel-good price if we do not have access to a brain scanner? Is there a good proxy for brain imaging that we can use?
Well, yes, there is, but of course, you don't need a brain scanner because I have one. So if you want to do this with me, just drop me a note. That is not the problem. There is, however, also another tool that I've developed, which is coming from psychology as well as my own research in EEG. So maybe let's first look into the question that business people have. Very often business people have the question, well, okay, you have done this with individual products and it's good, but can we scale it? Can I test my entire portfolio of products, right? I have 50 products or so. And then it's always possible to run brain scans, but it's a bit hard to scale. So the version that we've developed is something that we know from the 2,500 EEG brain scans, is that every time we showed them a price, we also gave people a decision. And that decision was that they had to press the keys cheap or expensive. I just press the left or right arrow key. Now the reason in the EEG is, on the one hand, that people shouldn't fall asleep when they do such research. You cannot just show them price and product, and after a few minutes you'll only measure that they become tired. That's what you can do. So you have to keep their mind engaged, and the way to keep the mind engaged is to make them press these buttons. Now, imagine I'm showing you a specific product that you really like. Maybe let's revert back to the Starbucks coffee. When I say 10 cents, you'll be quickly saying that's cheap. When I say 10 euros, you'll be quickly saying that that's expensive. But when I say 240, or now with inflation, time has moved on, maybe 3 euro or 280 or so, you'll be thinking, is this a good price or is this not? Is this cheap? Let's say expensive, right? So you may not be honest with me, but you have taken a split second longer with your decision. And that reaction time is what we measure. And we actually use our modeling later because we know what the longer reaction time to which brain signal that relates to. So we, in the end, in our value perception model, we have the EEG, entire EEG benchmark of 2,500 brain scans being basically feeding the algorithm that we use for analyzing the reaction time. And so with this reaction time data, it's been used in lots and lots of studies, and it has been demonstrated to be a very, very good proxy for value perception. And other models, we have also modeled demand, then, and we've modeled optimal profit and so forth, for which this is all an interesting tool. And the feedback so far has been great from the market. So that's one way to do it. Also, maybe a little bit more on the budget side.
Yeah, I'm glad we don't all need EEG machines now.
Well, if you well, it's not that much more expensive, but anyway, if you are interested in how much it costs, I can just you can just come to my lab and I'll make an EEG brain scan with you.
Awesome. That's
and and then we can talk about the price. Huh?
Now, I'm curious, how much does branding influence that feel good price? Now, you can have the same product category, say a dress, and I would assume that the feel good price is very different for, say, a Versace dress than for a no name brand. Is that right?
Yes, that is true. So the brand influences the price perception a lot. In many markets, this is called a price premium. So certain brands, I don't know, maybe Adidas has a price premium over Fila, and wants to understand that, wants to measure that, or as you say, I don't know, uh, Versace has one over H&M or whatever the example is. Interestingly, something that we have been using these brain scans and these subconscious measures for is to try to understand if that price premium is an a fixed number, or is it a fixed percentage, or is it not fixed at all, right? So the question is, let's say if you are trying to sell Fila shoes, and you know that Adidas has potentially, I don't know, usually sells the same shoes. Well, more or less, I shouldn't say the same shoes. They're not the same shoes, but they are very similar shoes. The competitive product. They sell that for, say, 20 euros more. The nice thing is you can, in that case, actually find the competitive sweet spot with these technologies, which is something we've done, for example, with beers, where people are very price sensitive and they buy in a certain category of beers. They are fixed on 2, 3, 4 brands. And then we could say, so your competitive sweet spot is exactly at that and that price, where you have with respect to your competitors, the highest margins and the highest market shares.
So interesting. Now, when you think, we often think of prices in terms of pain, right? Or it's prices often, or is in general, perceived as pain. So at a low price might be relatively painless, whereas a high price is perceived as very painful. Now, I was wondering, when you compare high ticket versus low ticket products. So when I refer to high ticket, that's usually something $2,000 or above. And you have a low ticket offer, say, a €9 subscription to whatever. So if you compare those two, how can you frame and anchor the high ticket offer in a way that reduces that initial sticker shock reaction where it's like, what?
So the key term here is anchoring. You have to always think about what is the comparison to this product, right? And what do I compare it to? In my brand communication, I can give you a very, very extreme example. I worked with a drug. And the alternative to that, and drugs can sometimes have very high prices, prescription drugs. And in this case, the competition or the alternative to that drug was a lung transplant. I mean, that's one of the craziest things you can imagine. Like, I mean, and obviously it's extremely expensive and probably has follow-on costs and so forth. But the pharmaceutical company said, look, our drug, which has had a lot of R&D in it, has a lot of cost in it. But the benchmark is lung transplant. So, well, we have to see what we compare that to, and so in the end they put a very, very high sticker price on it, and it became one of the absolute ultimate blockbusters there in that market.
Wow.
So that's one thing, right? So you always have to compare that thing, right? I can also give you another example of a research that I've done where we looked at an electronic dog collar. As a project was in the end abandoned, not because of my research, but because of other issues. But
Uh-huh.
it was an electronic dog collar that would have be a fitness tracker for the dog. It would have a Wi-Fi connection to the vet and so forth. So, and you could always GPS locate your dog, etc. So very innovative thing. But for some people, this was more like compared to typical apps, to an app price, right? So they put a relatively low value on it, more like what's a typical app worth, like maybe between €1 and €5 or so, or $1 and $5. But for others, this was more like, they were thinking like, okay, this actually keeps my dog healthy and alive, and they compared it to the price of a special breed of dog or something like that, which was like maybe more than $1,000 or so per individual dog. And so you see, what do I compare that to? That's the critical question. If you want to introduce the electronic dog collar and say, well, your dog will on average live twice as long or so, and you don't have to buy a new dog or so that is $1,500, then that's worth it. Paying a lot for such a device, including or for an expensive subscription.
Gotcha. Now, another interesting thing is when marketing experts talk about creating enticing, high ticket offers, they often advise people to create an irresistible offer stack. That's what they call it, because they basically say the more you put in there, the better. So you get this benefit, and then you get that, and wait, there is more, and you also get this bonus and another bonus. So what do you think about this approach from a behavioral science perspective? You talk about this a little bit in your book, and I think it's very relevant to the listeners. So I would love for you to explain, when are we actually enhancing and when are we diluting the value of the offer by creating a stack or bundle?
Oh, this is a really, really tricky question. There are two very interesting studies, one of which has demonstrated the less is better effect. So if you have an offer, if not every piece of your bundle is spectacularly good, but there are seriously inferior pieces, then that devalues the entire package. I'm doing a lot of consulting with hotels, for example. And the one thing that I'm saying, if you offer a gym, every piece of equipment must work in there, right? If you have a gym and 3 out of 8 of the devices are bad, that actually devalues the entire value of the package, right? Because people feel like this is a very lousy hotel. So in that case, you better don't offer a gym at all and say, well, we are $200 per night. But we don't have a gym. But if you say you have a gym, it really has to be, working out very well, and every individual equipment has to be in perfect shape, right? Because that is what has been studied in depth in the so-called less is better effect. Another experiment that demonstrated that was with ice cream cups. If you have an overflowing ice cream cup, you are willing to pay more for it than if you have an underfilled ice cream cup, even if that underfilled ice cream cup is twice the size of the small ice cream cup. You feel cheated, and you feel like someone's been very cheap there, and people really don't like that. So again, we get back to the topic that price and product are a relatively arbitrary association between two things. The other thing, which is very tricky to control, is that if you have extreme value differences in between two things, right? So if you say, I'm going to sell Oh yeah, I'm. There's a good one. I'm going to sell a spectacular cell phone. Okay, uh, and you get a relatively I don't know, cheap cover with it, something
Mhm.
like that, then that cheap additional item devalues the entire package. That is a very a tricky thing to control, because if it's not a cheap um, thing, but it's a little bit more of an I say an expensive cover, or a mid priced cover, for example, then the um, the entire package can actually be increase its value,
Mm.
because if there is also an effect that is called the power of free, and the power of free actually is the insight that people love getting something for free, right? So if you say, I'm going to sell you the cell phone for 1,500 euros, and here you get a free little thing for free on top, free headphones or so, then that's what people like, right? But if it's all
Mhm.
too cheap headphones, then it devalues the package. So it's a tricky road, and it's probably something where you should think a lot about in how to design your proposals and your bundles.
Yeah, so more is not always better. And
Yes.
going back to that free, one thing that I noticed and I was curious about is the free plus shipping funnels that you see a lot these days, especially
Mhm.
for books, for instance. So, do they actually make sense from a behavioral science perspective, or are they more like the example in your book where the company debated to send free goods to one of their customers as a gesture of goodwill, but then they wanted to charge for shipping nonetheless? What do you think about those book funnels?
So the book funnels are, you get maybe because I'm not exactly sure I understand it, so maybe we can explain it to the listeners. So it's a book free shipping,
So
or the other way around.
the book is announced as a free book, but
Okay, got
you
it.
have to pay for shipping and handling.
Okay, that way around. That way around, it is. It looks very strange, honestly,
Right.
because you feel like you're being ripped off on something that is free in other cases. Um, this is something people generally really dislike a lot, when they are being ripped off on minor things. So one famous example is the razor and blade pricing, where you get more or less the razor for more
Yes.
or less for free, and then you have to pay lots and lots for the stupid refills, right? Or in printers, we know this, or um, in coffee machines with coffee tabs and stuff like that. So these things, this is a very fine line. You
Mm.
have to probably pre-test those things very, very well before you launch them, especially these more strategic pricing approaches, whether you do a razor and blade model and at which point the customer feels cheated, or really feels like they're being ripped off. That's a tricky thing. You also see this in cars, for example. At one point, I damaged my mirror on my car, my
Mm.
outside mirror, and I
Mhm.
bought an original mirror, and it was just way too expensive for the stupid mirror. And that is something we also actually done research with one of the major car brands on how to price their after sales items, and people are very sensitive there, and you are also in danger if you're being ripped, if you feel like you're being ripped off, you're in danger of getting low reviews, getting low stars, and so forth. So I'd be rather cautious here.
Yeah, I think that these free plus shipping might offers, they might benefit from like this form of mental accounting where shipping costs are maybe perceived differently, like is coming from a different
Hmm.
mental account. But kind of like you already said, to me it doesn't feel free, if
Yeah.
especially if the shipping and handling is just as much as you would typically pay for a book anyways. So for
Yeah.
instance, the Russell Brunson's Expert Secrets is free, but you have to pay $9.95 for shipping, or even $19.95 for international shipping, which is like, this is what I would pay for a book anyway. So how is
Yeah.
this free? It doesn't make sense to me, but apparently it's working. So I was curious about
Well, it
this.
might be a secret, huh?
Yeah. And the other thing that I noticed along those lines is I've seen more and more businesses do $1 trials. And I was
Mhm.
wondering, so it's I've seen this for a lot of subscription services where they try to
Mhm.
get people into the door. And I understand that it's more about getting people to make those micro commitments that help them move through the sales funnel more quickly by creating the sense that they have already invested and now they will just continue down that path because it's aligned with their past actions. But as you've discussed in your book, and as we've just talked about, there's this huge difference between truly free and a small price point. And I was also wondering whether this anchoring effect of having this $1 trial wouldn't make it so much harder to sell subsequent offers because
Yes.
you've already anchored to this $1 trial. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. That is a very, very tricky thing to do. If you want to have low barrier offers, you have to have a good something really good to upgrade, so that people really are going to do the upgrade at some point, right?
Mm.
Um, um, and that's the one thing. The other thing with the micro commitment is that they are often not that micro. They are just made to look micro.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I've recently subscribed to the Wall Street Journal because they had this very cool offer for just $2 or so per month. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, this is such a micro commitment that I thought, well, the Wall Street Journal, that's worth it. $2. And obviously I don't read it that much, but that is probably for them, that is the right thing to do, because they would have not gotten me as a customer with a different subscription model and with a higher price. So in that case, it's really about it's really about having those $2 or not having them for them. And for them, there's basically zero product cost for them. There's zero marginal cost for them for each subscriber more. It's just a few euros or dollars more. So that's for them quite a good move, I assume. And then we also see that many models have moved towards a flat fee, a permanent payment. Starting with Amazon Prime, or I don't know, online subscriptions, as well as I don't know, uh, flat fees for cleaning, for cleaning services, or even for LinkedIn page. All these things have made us much more gotten used to accept permanent fees and accept rentals over ownership, right? If that's another thing. So people have, for example, Spotify is a good example. People don't exactly know how old you are, but when I tell my students that back in the days, people used to have CD collections and vinyl collections, They're like, well, what the heck is that? And why would you ever need that? And I'm like, yeah, but when I was a teenager, we would look up to the person who had the largest CD collection, which is really today sounds like a most bizarre thing. I haven't looked at any CDs in 10 years or so, probably. So, you see that, so the world is changing towards a subscription model, and many companies are taking advantage of that with even small subscriptions.
Yeah, that's true. Now we could talk about this for hours, but unfortunately we have to wrap up. But there's one more question that I really wanted to ask you. So for that, I would like to zoom out a little bit for the moment and talk about sales in general, because sometimes something that I found interesting in your book, or in the way that you framed the invisible game in the book, was this offense versus defense approach and pitting sellers versus buyers. But a sales negotiation does not necessarily have to be this two-player zero-sum game, right? So can you explain the role of collaboration versus competition in sales negotiations, and how can we use the invisible game, as well as maybe insights from, say, game theory, to engineer win-win scenarios?
Yes, indeed. So for many companies, unfortunately, it is still the case that they are only looking at revenues and market shares. And so let's say if another player in the industry announces that, for example, they're raising salaries or their raw materials have gone up in price, that's a signal that they will probably raise their prices at some point. So they are actually doing this active marketing, market signaling. Now, such active market signaling is an opportunity to cooperate or to behave non-cooperatively, right? If you behave non-cooperatively, you can go to your customers and say, look at that. Those people are probably going to raise their prices. I'm not, right? And maybe that's giving you market share, and that's giving you entire revenue or total revenue, but it's probably not going to give you margin. A much smarter way and a more collaborative way in terms of game theory would be to go to your customer and say, I'm sorry, look, even the market leader is announcing that, and these raw material price changes, they're even affecting us more. So I'm sorry, probably we'll have to discuss prices very soon. So here's one thing where you are really, you really should think about systemic effects of the invisible game, and effects on how you should be potentially read up your game theory knowledge again, and think about what's going to be the impact. And one thing that we know, which is pricing strategists call this a price war, and in a price war everybody loses. And in a game theory context, this is basically the prisoner's dilemma, where you could say whenever you don't cooperate, everybody is worse off in the end, right?
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I always like to create those win-win situations where everyone wins, and it's not this race to the bottom where everyone loses. So last but not least, where can people connect with you online if they would like to learn more about you or get their brain scanned, and or where can they get your book?
Well, I am active on a number of platforms, but really, if you want to connect with me, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, Kai-Markus Müller on LinkedIn. I also have a website, www.kaimarkusmuller.com. I'm also can be found on Neurensics website, where I'm the director of pricing research. If you're interested in doing brain scans or reaction time studies, neurensics.com. But you'll probably find all that via LinkedIn anyway. Yes, so that's the place to follow me. I have a little YouTube channel where we will add a few clips very soon. Right now, it's not that many. Yes, send me feedback. Let me know what you think. And where do you get the Invisible Game? You get this anywhere where you can buy good books, where you prefer online or offline. It's The Invisible Game, The Secrets and the Science of Winning Minds and Winning Deals, which is written by me and by Gabrielle Reebok.
Perfect. Again, thank you, Kai, so much for sharing all those insights and tips with us today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our audience does too.
Thank you so much. It was fabulous to be on this show, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care and talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That's a fantastic, easy, and zero-cost way to help the show grow. Just use the link in the show notes and make my day. If you'd like to take it one step further, you can now join my inner circle and become an official supporter of the Wired for Success podcast. Supporting the show is super simple and will only take about 30 seconds. Basically, it works like any other paid subscription. All you have to do is to go to glow.fm/Wired for Success podcast, pay $5 per month or as much or as little as you like, and choose the link of the podcast player you want to use. You can listen anywhere in any app. So for less than the price of 1 to 2 fancy coffees per month, you can really make a difference and help me keep this show awesome. For more tips and info, check out my website at wiredforsuccess.solutions. Thanks a ton and talk to you soon.